joining us. We were having a lovely, sweet, nice conversation, pretty much between Max and Will, about if it's fair to compare Brady and Michael Jordan as the GOAT, considering they both now have 6 rings. Stephen A., you kind of fell back and just listened to that one, so I'd like to get your take, because these two are on opposite ends.
Well, first of all, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And let me also say, it's great seeing 2 white men yell and scream. It's normally me. Give me a chance to get my bum-ass notes together. It's tremendous.
Quite honestly, I was just sitting here sipping on my tea. I thought that it was great. You know, you got to know when to step back and just let the show be a show. And I want to say, I find myself incredibly proud of Will Cain this morning. I think Will Cain is absolutely 1,000% on the money. And here is the reason why. Because Max has already conceded we're not talking about Brady against Jordan as an athlete. We recognize the fact that there's one Michael Jordan and there is no one else. So if you take away the word athlete per se, now we have to lean on the accomplishments while taking into account each respective sport.
Right, but I think that what Max Kellerman is trying to say is that when you take away the word athlete, that does not mean that you separate their individual accomplishments in the regular season and the disparity between themselves and the next best competitor. That's his point. Even though I don't think that his point is as cogent or as potent as he wants it to be, that's his point. That's why he's saying that this is not even a conversation, that it's not even fair to compare, because Max Kellerman believes that Jordan was so far ahead of his competition, while Brady pretty much was in the morass of other great quarterbacks in the 2000s, and he was viewed as a system quarterback throughout the 2000s. He just was. Peyton Manning was viewed as being a player who was better than him, who just could not get over the hump. And then around 2009, 2010, Aaron Rodgers was viewed as being the best quarterback in the NFL pretty much until 2015. That's why I say Brady is someone who is, we may have never seen him before in the history of professional sports. A player who was as great as he was for the first 15 years of his career and has actually been better over the last 5 years than he was for any stretch over those first 15 years. But Max's overall point is that Jordan was so discernibly better than everybody else that it's difficult to compare Brady to him.
And when you take into account the sport of football, how important the quarterback position is, and then we look at the credentials of a Tom Brady, who's been to 9 Super Bowls in 18 years, having won 6 of them, having 6 titles and the 14 All-Pro appearances, the list goes on, has been universally recognized, even by Max, as the greatest quarterback, if not the greatest football player who's ever lived. So if you're going to concede his greatness, not just as a quarterback, but as a football player, and we recognize we're not talking about quote-unquote athlete, what we're doing is saying, in your respective sport, what do you measure up to? The reality is that we may have begrudgingly gotten to the point of recognizing Tom Brady as the GOAT, whereas we never had that kind of debate with Michael Jordan.
Well, if we're going to keep it 100, Stephen A. Smith, Michael Jordan was recognized as the greatest player in the history of the NBA way too prematurely. They were calling him the greatest player in the history of the NBA before he even won his first championship. So that's where a lot of the resentment from the players of the 80s for Jordan comes from. And you could sense it from Abdul-Jabbar and from Isaiah Thomas especially. Magic Johnson kind of recognized early in what direction the wind was blowing. So he got on the Jordan bandwagon because he realized this guy's going to become so big that it's not going to be advantageous for me to make an overt enemy of him. So let me just conform right now and go along with the Jordan stuff. But they were calling Jordan the greatest NBA player ever in 1990, even before he won a championship. Now, fortunately for him, he was able to win enough championships and dominate the league to a high enough degree that the claims that he's the greatest player ever are actually justified. But they were calling him the greatest player ever far too prematurely.
The bottom line is most human beings have, realized the error of our ways in doubting the greatness of this man. And that's what this comes down to, which is why, to me, Will Cain is right on the money.
we have to ask ourselves, what are we talking about when we say greatest? Are we really comparing apples to apples? And I understand it's cross sports, so it's hard to find a common denominator. What I am trying to explain, and since you two perhaps don't understand, maybe I didn't do a good enough job, because if you understand the point, you simply can't argue
we
against
never
it.
understand you.
Max Kellerman, he loves going that route because he knows it's going to piss them off. He basically just says, you guys are too stupid to get what I'm saying, which sometimes is the case. Sometimes you talk to people and they're not quite swift enough to understand what you're getting at.
You
simply can't argue
we
against
can't
it.
disagree with you. We just never comprehend.
Well, no, because this point is so correct. Who could possibly argue against it?
Right.
That when we
That's
say
how you feel
greatest,
about everything.
when we say greatest, we're not simply talking about career accomplishment. LeBron James may be able to pass Michael Jordan if we're simply talking about overall career value. Maybe Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was already ahead of Jordan. We're not just talking about career value. We're talking about the heights reached. Tom Brady, here and there in his career, was considered the best player in the league in a given season. Tom Brady, actually most seasons, certainly regular season, Peyton Manning was considered better than Tom Brady.
Agreed.
I was someone who's saying I'd rather have Tom Brady because I don't trust Peyton under pressure.
Agreed.
That wasn't the argument for many, many years. It was many years unclear who was the best player in basketball right through the middle of Tom Brady's prime. It was never unclear who was the best player, in football. It was never unclear who was the best player in basketball when Michael Jordan was in his prime.
Well, it's debatable. I mean, it depends on where you consider his prime to have started at. Because if you were to say that his prime started in 1987, which is when he won his first MVP. He won his first MVP in the 87-88 season. You could certainly make the case that as an overall player, Bird and Magic were still more impactful than him, even though Jordan was putting up astronomical individual numbers. That season that Jordan had in the 1987-88 season is arguably the greatest individual season that any player's ever had. The dude averaged 35 points a game on 54% from the field, led the league in steals, had over 100 blocks. He was the first player to have over 200 steals and 100 blocks in one season. And that was actually his second consecutive year doing that. The year before, when he averaged 37 a game, he also had over 200 steals and 100 blocks at the shooting guard position. I consider Jordan's overall prime to have started in 1990 when he won his first championship, the 90-91 season. By then, he was discernibly the best player in the NBA.
So if you're not just talking about career accomplishment, longevity, how long did you last? I don't think that's just what we mean by greatness. But it's two are not in the same category.
But it's part of it. I do think, and I'm sure you're going to tell me I don't, but I do think I understand your argument. You're focused clearly on the word dominance. And in a lot of the times, Max, listen, I do my best to understand your arguments. Forgive me for my intellectual failings and sometimes not measuring up 100% to the conclusions that you reach. But I encounter this with you a lot. I feel like this happened with Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady debates. You do focus on dominance. You do focus on talent. You do focus on eyeballs, which you said a moment ago, and oh wow moments. But you also just acknowledge there's another aspect to this. Longevity. Dominance comes in many forms. Period of time. How much did you exceed your level of competition, including accomplishments? Tom Brady, 9 Super Bowl appearances. What's the next closest in his category? What's the next closest in football? It's 5. It's 5. It's almost half of what he accomplished. 6 Super Bowl wins. What's the next closest in his category? 4. He has 100% more, 50% more. Help me with that math, Max. More. He has a lot more, okay, than Bradshaw and Montana.
Yeah, thank you.
We also have to understand, though, that when you're comparing him to Terry Bradshaw and Joe Montana, once again, especially Joe Montana and Bradshaw for that matter, they were allowed to hit the quarterback so much harder and everywhere back in that era. The NFL actually changed the rule on where you could hit the quarterback because of Tom Brady when he got his knee snapped back in 2008. It's because of Tom Brady that they changed the rule. So it's just different. I mean, who knows what may have happened to Brady in the last few years had they not lessened the pressure on the quarterback that the defensive line was allowed to exert. They just can't hit the quarterback like that anymore. Like the hit that Leonard Marshall laid on Joe Montana in the 1990 NFC title game, he'd probably get kicked out of the game for that today. It'd definitely be roughing the passer or, some type of excessive contact law. right now you have to lay the quarterback down gently and all that other stuff. That aids in you putting up many of these Super Bowl appearances and playoff appearances and things of that nature.
Thank you for that. I know, I told you, it doesn't measure up 100%. The point is, Max, Tom Brady has dominated his category in a way that puts him in comparison with Jordan. I don't think
it puts him in conversation with Jordan. I wouldn't say in direct comparison.
I don't think I've argued, nor does Stephen A. argue. He would win the argument in the end because you're right, there's a level of dominance that Jordan achieved. But don't pretend like this isn't debate. Don't pretend like this isn't a conversation. You're just changing it to win it.
No, it's not a conversation, in fact. What we saw in this last Super Bowl is the extent to which it's Belichick and not Brady. The fact that Belichick was able to go 11-5 with Matt Castle, and by the way, just the other year with Jimmy G and
unbecoming
3-1, means that 14-6 without he's winning more than twice as much as he's losing. Tom Brady won a very good quarterback throughout a lot of these playoffs, and yet they won the Super Bowl. Now, was he clutch when you needed him to be? Absolutely. I would say Brady in this last Super Bowl is like a slightly diminished version of Eli Manning in his prime. A game manager who, when you needed him to be excellent, was excellent. Sure. But he won the Super Bowl not because it was Tom Brady, but because he was being coached by Belichick, because the defense played lights out, because they could run the ball when they needed to, etc. I mean, that's why they dead last against the blitz throughout the 25 QBR, as I mentioned.
Once again, that is why I liken Tom Brady. Like, I would never compare him to Michael Jordan. I liken Tom Brady more to Tim Duncan. Remember, Tim Duncan became a diminished version of himself down the stretch of his tenure with the San Antonio Spurs. And he decided, along with Pop, of course, that they were going to run the offense more through Ginobili and Tony Parker, and then later on through Kawhi Leonard. Because he understood, I'm just here to be a part of the team now. I'm not here to be the focus of the team anymore. Tom Brady's the quarterback, so he's always going to be the focus to a degree. But with the way in which they run the football now, that's pretty much a revealer as to how he understands some of his skills have diminished, and Belichick understands that his skills have diminished. And that's okay. But when you have a winning mentality and your football IQ is that high, really when your IQ is that high in any field of endeavor, it's going to assist you in winning championship matches that you probably shouldn't win if we were just to compare athleticism versus athleticism or proficiency versus proficiency. That's why I stated in another video that this Super Bowl reminded me a lot of some of Muhammad Ali's fights late in his career in the mid to late 70s, where certain people say he got a gift decision, how he knew how to survive over the course of 15 rounds, even when he was not in the best shape, or Floyd Mayweather in some of his latter fights, maybe the rematch against Marcos Maidana, or his last fight against Andre Berto, when it was very obvious that he was done with the sport. He was looking up at the clock late in the rounds, but he knew how to win. The Patriots know how to win.
Question, man. In the Super Bowl, Jordan never had performances like that, ever.
He also wasn't there as many times until...
Well, that's not quite true. Michael Jordan had a few stinkers, especially in that second three-peat. There were some games where he did not shoot well, but he always played well because defensively he was always ethereal.
Until later in age to do it.
Hold on, Will. Hold on.
Yeah.
Max, that is flat out false. I'll give you a perfect example. Game 6, Chicago Bulls versus Portland Trailblazers, 1992. What happened in that game?
Michael Jordan was not playing that well down the stretch. He got tired. They sat him down. Scottie Pippen and the bench players like Stacey King, they actually led the comeback. And then Jordan came in with about 5 or 6 minutes left and finished off the Trailblazers. That's a great comment by Stephen A. Smith. Forgot about that one.
I don't recall off the top of my head in 1992 Game 6.
Well, let me refresh your memory. Michael Jordan was on the bench. Michael Jordan was struggling that particular game. And the Chicago Bulls with the Winningtons of the world.
Well, no, Winnington was not on that team.
And was it Paxson or B.J. Arms, whatever the hell it was.
It was Stacey King and Scott Williams, and I believe maybe Bill Cartwright was on the floor. Will Perdue was the bench player. He might have been on the floor instead of Cartwright. Either way, the bench players got that team going because I think they were down big in that game. They may have been down 18 points going into the fourth quarter, and they had a huge comeback. There was also a pivotal play where Pippen, I believe that he hit the ball off of Danny Ainge's back on an out-of-bounds play. I think Jordan came down and stole the ball from Buck Williams after Buck Williams had gotten the rebound under the basket and Jordan stole the ball and then laid it up. But, yeah, that's a great catch by Stephen A. Smith. But if I were to think about some of the games in the finals where Jordan did not play well, you can go to a bevy of games in the late 90s in that second three-peat team, because he did not play great against the Seattle Supersonics. He only really had one real Michael Jordan-type game, that being Game 3. I mean, offensively anyway. He was great in the first half. He scored like 27 points in the first half. He was cooking everybody. And the second half, they didn't need him to score too much. They blew Seattle out that game. But games 4, 5, and 6, he did not shoot well.
They made a run at the Portland Trailblazers with Michael Jordan on the bench waving his towel, cheering them on.
Yep.
It was not one of his greatest performances. Now, ultimately, Phil Jackson put him in the close.
Game what?
But the point is, it was
Game 6 of the 1992 NBA Finals, Max Kellerman. We know you're going to go watch it to verify.
It was not one of his greatest performances.
Game
the
what?
fact of the matter is that
Right.
Game 6, that was the closeout game, Max.
Right. They
That was
didn't
the
get to
closeout
a
game.
Game
They took the
7.
Portland Trailblazers out in 6 games. They didn't
But
get
why
to a
didn't-
Game 7. Well,
Right.
Max, hold on. See, that's just ignorant right there.
That is ignorant, because there's no Game 7 in football. So, I mean, every game is Game 7.
Right there. This is the Super Bowl. It's not a 7-game series.
I'm glad you called him out on that dumb shit, Stephen A. Smith.
Series in football. It's the Super Bowl, okay?
Yeah.
So we all understand that. Oh, it didn't get to a Game 7. Excuse me, you can't win a Super Bowl without getting to the damn Super Bowl. And it's not a 7-game series in football.
Stephen
so,
A.
So stop doing that.
If you look
That
at
has
Michael
nothing to do
Jordan, my
with
point
it.
is this: Michael Jordan's
I'm just addressing your point.
Okay, I'll
that it
counter
never
it.
happened
I'll
with
counter
Jordan.
it. I'll counter it. Michael Jordan's regular
Nothing to
season
counter. You said it never
performance,
happened.
by the most advanced metrics, was qualitatively better than Wilt Chamberlain or LeBron James. And our eyeballs tell us the same thing. Michael Jordan in the regular season is demonstrably the greatest player who ever lived. His postseason numbers, by every metric, were better than his regular season numbers. Now, let me compare that to Tom Brady. Tom Brady's regular season performance is not the highest standard of all time, and his postseason performance only exceeded his regular season performance later in his career. It's not the same thing.
Is there anybody in football is? Is
No,
there anyone in
no,
football
there's never been a-
who's
no.
who's exactly
No.
because it's a different sport.
Right. There's never been a Michael Jordan of football.
You're also giving Michael Jordan credit for having not been.
I'm not quite sure about that, Max Kellerman. The Michael Jordan of football was Jerry Rice. When you look at how far ahead he is of everybody else in touchdowns and yards from scrimmage, once again, there's a reason why I say that Jerry Rice is the greatest football player of all time. Okay, this guy has like 23,000 yards from scrimmage as a professional football player. Has over 200 touchdowns. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Been there later in his career. It's the exact argument you've used for LeBron James. Tom Brady, you point out, at 41. At 41, something no one has ever done. Just won yet another Super Bowl. Led his team to another Super Bowl. And you're pointing out, wasn't his best performance. And I think Jordan wins this debate. So let me put that caveat out there again. Where was Jordan at 41? You're giving him credit for not having sub-Jordan performances later in life, not being in the finals. You're doing the thing that you criticize people of doing with LeBron.
What I would say is this: if Michael Jordan played in an era where you weren't allowed to do things to the offensive player, maybe he could have.
There's so many caveats, dude. You get it?
No, it's not really a caveat right there. Max Kellerman does make a lot of caveats, but you asked a pretty asinine question there. Like, why would you ask where was Michael Jordan at 41? Basketball is not a game that you can dominate at the shooting guard position at the age of 41. Everybody knows that. In the NFL, at quarterback, you can play until 41 because there's not that much movement involved. There's not that much explosiveness that is asked of that position, whether you're 21 or 41. Now, depending on your speed, your coach might ask you to do some sprint rollouts or even bootlegs or run with the football. But it's just two totally different positions. That's why it's tough to have this conversation. The question is it fair to compare Tom Brady and Michael Jordan? The answer is yes, that it's fair to compare. Now, if we want to ask another question, is the conversation worth having when we already know the outcome? That's a whole other question. I think that you guys are arguing two different questions. Stephen A. Smith and Will Cain are responding to the question. Max Kellerman is responding to the second question, which is whether or not the conversation is worth having. He feels like it's not because we already know what the answer is. And as per Stephen A. Smith and Will Cain, they've shown that they already know what the answer is.
Coach, defense, rules, running game. You carry out greatness to such an extent.
Look, they both won 6 championships. I can flip that around on you and say, and Jordan did it in 4 seasons fewer.
Absolutely, that's the best point, sir.
He was, so his dominance was much more thorough.
Hold on. Let me drop the mic on this, especially for Max Kellerman here, because obviously, you know what, we're all ignorant and you just can't comprehend. That's the only reason to justify disagreeing with Max, because we can't comprehend. But I will say this to you. Well, Michael Jordan never won a championship without Phil Jackson, who obviously had him rethink the game of basketball and
Absolutely, because Phil Jackson was his handler.
Change his game in order to learn how to win championships. But
and considered one of the greatest basketball coaches of all time. Yes,
yes, because of Michael Jordan.
But you're not caveating Jordan.
Well, hold on.
Well, that's not quite fair. We can't call Phil Jackson one of the great coaches of all time because of Michael Jordan, when he had almost equivalent success with Kobe Bryant and Shaq, and then Kobe and Pau Gasol. People will say, well, he was supposed to win. He had all that talent. Well, the fact of the matter is that there was only one championship won by all those great players outside of their tenure with Phil Jackson, and that's when Shaq won a championship with Dwayne Wade, and they happen to have Pat Riley as their coach. So there's always going to be a symbiotic relationship between great coaches and great players. Always.
And I'll explain why. Let me be very clear about Michael Jordan. Before Phil Jackson ever got there, Michael Jordan had some of the greatest seasons of all time. Maybe like the 1, 2, and 3 greatest seasons of all time before he knew Phil Jackson. Right? That's number one. He was already.
Not quite. He got to know Phil Jackson, I believe, in 1987, and the 87-88 season was his best individual season. Phil Jackson was not the head coach, but he was an assistant coach. Phil Jackson was basically a spy that was planted in Doug Collins' staff by Jerry Krause to make sure that Doug Collins was doing what Jerry Krause wanted him to do. So Phil Jackson eventually was there as a mole, as a spy, to snitch on Doug Collins. Doug Collins never really trusted him. And of course, eventually Doug Collins got removed for Phil Jackson in 2 seasons.
Already the best ever. That was not the case with Tom Brady. Number 2, the first time
Michael Jordan was not already the best ever. Let me rewind this back a little bit.
3 greatest seasons of all time before he knew Phil Jackson, right?
No. Michael Jordan actually had his best overall seasons with Phil Jackson, not so much as the head coach, but as the assistant coach. Because his season in 88 and 89 were probably his 2 best individual seasons. He knew who Phil Jackson was. Phil Jackson was on the coaching staff.
Right? That's number 1. He was already the best ever. That was not the case with Tom Brady.
No, sir. Michael Jordan did not become the best ever basketball player, I would say, not until he won his 6th championship. Like, that's when he definitively became the best basketball player of the modern era, which is from 1979 up to now.
Number 2, the first time Michael Jordan played with another All-Star, it was Scottie Pippen. He took the defending champion Pistons to Game 7. Pippen didn't play in Game 7. He lost.
No, Pippen actually played. He just had a migraine. Pippen folded to the pressure, and he admitted that.
The next time he played with an All-Star, it was Scottie Pippen again. This time he was healthy. They didn't win the championship again in under 7 games. So to say it's Phil Jackson didn't help.
If I were doing a Max Kellerman thing, I'd bring up Jackson, I'd bring up Pippen, I'd do things to take away from Jordan's accomplishments.
What's that?
I said Pippen played.
With the migraine?
He didn't play great because of the migraine.
No, he was right. Pippen was not Pippen.
And the Bulls were going to lose that game anyway. They just were not ready. The Pistons were the better team. The Pistons were going to beat them even with a fully healthy Scottie Pippen. They were not ready.
And by the way, he wasn't even prime Pippen yet. The point is, if you had to ask people,
this has been fun.
Is Jordan a product of Phil Jackson? That's ridiculous.
All right.
If you ask people,
Put me on
is
camera.
Brady a product of Belichick? That deserves a debate.
Are you not entertained? Yes, this is First Take.
Are you not entertained? Is this not why you were here?
Take. When we come back, Sean.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. I enjoyed this debate because it allowed a little factoid to come out about both Tom Brady and Michael Jordan. But just to sum everything up, is it fair to compare Tom Brady and Michael Jordan? Yes, it is. Is the conversation worth having? Well, it depends on how close you think the comparison is. I don't think that the comparison is close enough yet. I think that Tom Brady has to win at least one more championship to be right there with Michael Jordan, because Jordan was able to accomplish the same amount in less time. But anyway,